Hi, I'm Xavier McFarland, and welcome to the Catholicity podcast from the Mary Foundation. Today's episode features Charley Heintel, the founder of Quo Vadis, a Catholic young adult group in Avon Lake, Ohio, a suburb west of Cleveland. We discuss the beginnings of the group, how its small size contributes to adaptability, leadership commitments, and formation of smaller friend groups within larger communities. We talk about how leading a young adult group affects one's priorities, and how leaders can keep things fresh for their groups and themselves. We discuss the real amount of control a leader has over a group, and we elaborate on the spiritual dynamics of God's providence for the existence of these groups at all, highlighting several of the hard-to-see benefits while maintaining how it is okay for groups to be passed on or pass away, and much more. But first, if you want to learn more about Catholicism, or are looking for materials to evangelize family, friends, and fellow parishioners, please visit the Mary Foundation at Catholicity.com to order our Catholic scapulars, books, booklets, medals, and best-selling novels by Bud McFarland. Sign up for Bud's Catholic City Message, where he's been sharing profound insights, sage advice, and crazy stories for over 25 years. We are also the world's largest distributor of the Purple Scapular, given by Mary to the approved French mystic Marie-Julie Jahenny in the late 1800s. You can learn more at our website, Catholicity.com. Hi, Charley. Thanks for coming on. How are you today?
I'm great, Xavier. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're here. Charley's calling in. It's me, your host, Xavier McFarland, and Anthony Mancini, Director of Outreach for CatholicYoungAdultGroups.org. Charley, can you just tell us about your group a little bit? Like, what's it look like?
Yeah, definitely. So our group is called Quo Vadis, which means where are you going in Latin. It's kind of taken from a biblical story with St. Peter. And we're a Catholic young adult group that meets in Avon Lake, Ohio, which is on the west side of Cleveland, about 30 minutes from downtown Cleveland. We've been going for about 2 years now. We have a nice group of people, and we're a discussion-based group, so we have different faith-based discussions every week, and we also have a social aspect as well.
Awesome. And if you don't know, like, Charley is one of the people, we know him personally in the Cleveland area. We actually started our groups kind of in the same wave, I would say.
Yeah, I'm curious, kind of where you got the motivation to start the group. Quo Vadis, Xavier mentioned in the same wave. What sort of inspired you and maybe some of your co-leaders?
Yeah. So when I graduated from college and moved back home to Cleveland, I got involved with a group on the south side of town called Catching Fire. And it was a really fantastic group. This was during COVID. So there wasn't much going on except for going to this group every Sunday. And it was really great to be a part of it. And then that's where I met you guys. And then once you guys started Grapevine, I really saw that this structure, this approach to young adult groups had a lot of interest from young adults in the community. And I saw that the model that Catching Fire used was replicable. So you guys really gave me the confidence to start my own group, because while I loved Catching Fire and while I loved going to Grapevine, I really felt that the importance of a young adult group was something that should be brought to the area I'm living in. So once I saw the success that Catching Fire and Grapevine had, it really gave me the confidence to start a group of my own. So I reached out to somebody I went to college with, who had also come on one of our retreats. Her name is Grace, and asked her if she wanted to help lead the group, because all the other groups had two leaders. So I thought, well, we should probably have two leaders too. And she agreed. And so that's kind of how we got started, was just seeing what the other groups were doing and saying, hey, if they can do it and it works for them, then why can't we?
Nice. So you've had some success over the last 2 years. Can you tell us sort of the evolution of the group, sort of in a nutshell? So how did things start out 2 years ago, and then how did things progress, and then where are you now?
Mm-hmm. So I feel like we actually had a pretty strong start, and I think that was in part due to the support we had from people from those other groups that I mentioned. They were really supportive in the beginning. But then what I found was kind of interesting is there were people who I had identified that I thought, okay, they kind of live in this area on the west side and maybe they'll be interested. What I found was that for the most part, those people didn't really come out too much, but we were able to identify new people we had never known before, some of whom just kind of showed up and they kind of became some of our core members. So I feel like we had a strong start. And ever since then, we've really been able to build deeper relationships between the people in our group. So just getting to know everybody better, and people who, were strangers when they first came, I would consider good friends now.
So you have a pretty solid core of people at this point.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. There's people who they come almost every week, and you can always count on them, and have really kind of formed friend groups within the group.
Right.
So I think one of the things maybe that sets Quo Vadis apart, being a little further out from sort of the hub of the downtown area and population density, is like you mentioned Catching Fire. Like that's sort of a big group. Like I think they get 50 plus people now every week, sometimes more than 70. Whereas
Definitely.
Quo Vadis is not that large. Can you just talk on that, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like you said, our group, I think, ended up a little bit different just based on where we are located. So for context, Catching Fire being in the Parma area, that's a place where a lot of young adults are living. It's only about 10 minutes from downtown. Same thing with Lakewood, super close to downtown. Tons of young adults moving there after college and entering the workforce. And like Lakewood has over 50,000 people or something like that. And the Parma is similar. I mean, huge communities. Whereas Avon Lake's about 25,000 people. And what's interesting is that our parish, St. Joe's, where we meet, it's kind of at the north part of Avon Lake, right on Lake Erie. So it's not really near much. It's probably several minutes from the highway exit. So unless you live in Avon Lake, you're probably not very close to it. So what we found is that whereas the other groups, a lot of the people don't necessarily belong to the parish where the group meets, or didn't necessarily grow up at that parish, we found that our group, most of the people are living in Avon Lake. A lot of us grew up in Avon Lake. I definitely did. And we've been at the two parishes here for a long time. So it's just kind of a different dynamic, which I think is interesting. And a lot of us are living at home still, or whereas the other groups, it's more people kind of, on their own. Maybe they bought their first house, or they're living in an apartment. So just people, I think, maybe in just a little bit different context. But I mean, I think it's been great for us. I think that, I've been going to these parishes in Avon Lake my whole life. We have two of them, St. Joe's and Holy Spirit, but I feel like I know more people than ever before at the parishes from the group.
Yeah, that's definitely in terms of the other direction with Grapevine, where we're in Lakewood, where there's so many people and we're so close to so many other cities, where a lot of the people come from sort of weird all over. Like you'd think that we'd get a lot of Lakewood people, and we do. But it's also like on the flip side, it's kind of weird to not see everybody from the group like going to mass because they might go somewhere else. What are some of like the maybe strengths and challenges that you see from having this more parish centered group identity?
Yeah. So I think the strength is, and this is kind of wasn't one of the reasons we started the group, was I felt like all my friends were out in Parma, and I said, I know there must be other Catholic young adults in Avon Lake. Let's go find them. So I think the strength is that for the most part, we live pretty close together, and it's real easy to hang out or do things together. And I think it has allowed us to get somewhat involved in the parish level. I think the weakness is that we're just kind of a smaller group. Even if you're coming from Avon, which is directly south of Avon Lake, it could take you like 15 to 20 minutes to get to St. Joe's, which is about the same distance it would take me to get to Grapevine at Lakewood. So I think it kind of limits the population that we can really pull from in regards to group members. But I think it's allowed us to be pretty tight knit. And everybody, I think, dreams of having like this enormous overflowing young adult group when they start one, but that's not necessarily always better. right? The model of Jesus was investing really heavily in 12 people. So I think there are definitely advantages to a smaller group too. You can get to know people better. You don't necessarily feel like just a number or something like that.
Well, I see your model, which you've sort of stumbled upon and kind of cultivated here, smaller group, as a really good model for maybe even most parishes out there. So we were having a conversation yesterday about, for whatever reason, young adult ministry is somewhat of an afterthought across the country. There's not a whole lot of resources poured into it, and it's the first thing to get cut if resources are scarce, if there even is a minister at all. But we believe that every parish should have one. It should be sort of along the lines of a youth ministry. Most parishes have one unless it's a seriously old parish that absolutely cannot accommodate, a youth ministry. We believe that it should be on that level. And for a group like yours to be sort of a model for a parish that has a young adult population, certainly, but not a large one, it can still work and absolutely be beneficial to those young adults at that parish. I agree with you in that, when we started Grapevine, we wanted it to be big, and we put out we casted a wide net. So does Catching Fire. And we've seemed to reach some sort of limit here for other reasons, but it's like you maybe have reached your limit just based on your geographical location and parish that's hosting you. So I think that's very encouraging to people trying to start a young adult group, and a testament to how every parish or most parishes can have one, even if it's small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I think when Catching Fire got started, and same thing with you guys, they were kind of the only young adult group around, right? So everybody kind of flocked to there. But the truth is that as we get more and more young adult groups, which is a good thing, there would naturally be smaller because people wouldn't have to drive across town to get to one. They can have one at their own parish.
Mm-hmm. But you've also discovered new young adults in a certain sense. I know you guys have your distinct culture and your specific attendees that, for lack of a better word, have an allegiance to Quo Vadis, and we have ours, and Catching Fire has theirs. There's some cross-pollination with Catching Fire and Grapevine, certainly, but less so with Quo Vadis. It's like you sort of tapped into a market, right, that wasn't serviced before because of location. So I think there's always room to grow the pie, so to speak, in a given area, a given diocese. So that's awesome, Charlie. I think you stumbled upon something there.
Yeah, that makes me think. We've talked to a couple leaders from some of the bigger cities like DC, and one of the things that seems pretty ubiquitous is when there's these larger groups that just end up having 50 or 70 or 40 or even 30 plus sort of members or people who show up every week or every couple weeks, they inevitably end up to provide small groups as an option. Excuse me. Like, it's almost like a necessity, like something about passing some tipping point in size means that in order to have the thing that people are searching for long term, it's a separate thing than like the big old young adult group system.
Yeah.
And I think it's like one of the things people think they have to do is that they have to have that big system in order to have a small group thing. But it sounds like Quo Vadis is just sort of organically already meets both of those needs at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think both are important because I do think there are advantages to having a larger network. You're not necessarily going to, there could be a lot of people you might be friends with who aren't in your specific group, but might be at the group down the road. I know I benefited greatly from being friends with you guys, being friends with people from Catching Fire. So I definitely value that. And one of the things I love is that there are opportunities for our groups to come together. For instance, like the weekly volleyball that we do at your guys' parish. A chunk of our members have been going to that, and it's awesome just to see people getting to know each other, and seeing the groups intermix. And the same thing with whether it's volleyball or frisbee or even the softball league. I think there has to be, in addition to the big group meetings, there has to be other ways to build community. Because if you just show up and there's 100 people and you chat to a few, it's going to be really hard to make friends long term because there's so many people. Mm-hmm. So I think the discussion group model is good for that, because you can have as many discussion groups as you need, and you can limit how many people are in each one. And then when you have these other events throughout the week or other opportunities for people to get involved, it gives people the opportunity to build deeper relationships with others, more so than they could do at just the group meeting.
Yeah, Xavier brings up an interesting point, actually, and you and I talked about this a little bit, Charlie, and this is when it really started to get interesting between you and me, was I called it the institutionalization of young adult ministries in Cleveland. So as the groups grow, maybe your group doesn't fit this bill yet, but it may down the line. At least for Grapevine and Catching Fire, it's almost as though people will come to our meetings and we'll grow, and then there's enough people under the umbrella of Grapevine or Catching Fire to where these smaller communities within the community sort of form, or you can call them friend groups. And this friend group over here, Group A, doesn't really, it's not that they don't interact with Group B, but it's definitely distinct, the two groups, for all intents and purposes of the example. So I guess my question, or it's just something kind of new to us, is that something that is a bad thing and something that should be fought, or something that you should just kind of ride the wave? Don't fight it, because it's natural. It's a natural progression as groups grow. So we've decided to take this. We've decided to adhere to the philosophy of just riding the wave. So we see these little friend groups, and we're like, okay, we'll do small groups and just put the existing friend groups in a small group unto themselves, and give them guidelines as to how to better, cultivate the relationships they already have. What do you think about that thought and the institutionalization of young adult ministries?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. And I think that the approach you guys are taking now with the small groups, I think, regardless of how they go, I think they will go well. I think it'll be a huge learning experience, though. I think you guys will learn a lot from it, and I'm excited to hear those insights. I think you're right that it is natural people create friend groups. I mean, that's just how we work. Mm-hmm. I think what we can do as leaders is to still foster inclusivity and connection and kind of interaction between those groups, because friend groups are good, cliques are bad, right? And what really is the difference is a question probably over my head, or that I would need to take more time to study. Mm-hmm. I think for myself, at least my philosophy as a group leader, and I think you kind of have to take a different approach when you're the leader, is whenever I have anything, I want it to be completely inclusive. So right, if there's a group member and they want to have a few people over to their house, it's not my place to say you have to invite all 30 or 40 of us, and that's not even really realistic. Mm-hmm. But I feel like as the group leader, if I'm going to host something, that I should include everybody, and I should make it open to everybody, because we've all had experiences of being left out, and that's just not fun. And I think, frankly, speaking for myself, and I know others in our groups, is that, we were not necessarily the popular kids growing up. I told Anthony the other day, we run a young adult group, we were not the popular kids growing up, right? So everybody knows what it feels like to be excluded, and so I think from a group standpoint and from a leadership standpoint, my philosophy is include everybody. Mm-hmm. What's going to can happen is you have too many people, then everybody feels like they could participate if they wanted to.
Right. And small groups aside, it's like we tried to strike this balance of we still have, 1 week a month is reserved for the small groups. We're not going to have that all-inclusive meeting that we've been having since the beginning of time here. But the other 3 weeks out of the month, on average, there is something that everybody can participate in. And we try to be inclusive that way. And, of course, the small groups themselves are inherently exclusive. But I agree with you. There's a lot of learning to be done in both realms, like striking that balance and, within the small groups themselves, if they're even viable the way we put them together. Because as the leader, I think you kind of, it's not that you're not the best person to put these groups together. I think you actually are, because you kind of observe things from sort of a higher vantage point, but you're not going to be 100% right with these pairings and these groupings of people. So there's going to be a lot to learn there. There might be some conflict that you need to resolve, moving people around to different groups and whatnot. So yeah, it's definitely something we're excited to find out.
I think it sheds light. I like the phrase that you used, in the institutionalization of young adult ministry, because I think it's a perennial problem of trying to do something inorganic to support something organic. Like almost in the same way like a raised garden bed exists. Like nowhere in nature is there a nice wooden box with really good topsoil where there's weeds get pulled out of the ground regularly. Like that's not a natural occurrence, but the plants growing in there are still organic plants, and their leaves and their interactions. Like that's all normal, and the bugs or whatever. I'm not a gardener. I'm just making this up mostly. I think, and
sounds right.
With people though, it's like almost weird. Like how do you set up an inorganic system called a young adult group in a way that people can organically interact in both a healthy manner as like socially as humans, but also in a way that helps grow our faith. And like, that's kind of the whole point of why we do this. Mm-hmm. And for a smaller group, or like maybe like we share the experience, Charlie, of doing this on the side with full-time jobs. So like when we started, we were already sort of members in a cool young adult group, and we're like, this is awesome. I want to have more of this in my life. And then I don't know exactly how you feel, but now we're running into our third year here shortly. And it feels a lot different than like the first year. It was like, hey, we're all just like young people getting together, like doing our thing. It was kind of like the new kids on the block plus figuring it out as we go, and very organic, even though it was like technically a young adult group with a structure. Whereas now it's like, okay, how many people do we need to get to sign up for this so it still goes on? And, maybe in a year, how can we have this super like nailed down so we can hand it off to somebody? And it's not the same people. Like when you're a member, you can be part of the turnover, but when you're the leader, you kind of watch the turnover. And like, I don't think there's something wrong necessarily with people coming and going over time. It's just, it feels like I run an institution, like a school where there's students who come through, and I'm sort of in a separate vantage point now as the original class, so to speak, is moving on to different stages in life.
Mm.
Yeah. And I love your gardening analogy. I think that one way to kind of protect against the bad part of institutionalization is keeping things fresh. And I think you guys have been really good at that. You guys are always willing to reanalyze the situation and try something new. And I know that Catching Fire has adapted as well, and Quo Vadis too, for the ones I can speak to. And that's something I try to keep an open mind about, just because I think if you just do the same thing every week perpetually, it's going to get stale. It's going to get boring. And I think you're so right. When you guys started Grapevine, it was super exciting, right? It was like, oh, there's this new group, new people, all this kind of thing. And it's hard to keep that energy, keep that dynamic. So I think I try to keep things fresh in just being kind of flexible. So like there's some weeks where we'll just do something different. And fortunately we have a small enough group where we can just say, hey, we're doing something completely different this week, and it's not that big of a hassle. For instance, before election season, we did a couple Holy Hours for Life at a parish, a couple cities over that a couple of our members belong to. They were having this Holy Hour for Life, so we just went to that for a meeting. That was awesome. We actually had super great turnout for that, even though it was even farther west. So I think keeping things fresh and not being afraid to try to mix things up when necessary, because maybe like the way you did things was awesome for that amount of time, but maybe it's like been there, done that. Now we want to try something new.
Yeah.
So whether it's like holding different events or trying different things for the meetings, or like what you guys are doing with the small groups, I think just keeping like the community fun and interesting and different. Like tradition is great, but at the same time, when it comes to social stuff, that you want to try things new. So like for us, when we have our social aspect after each meeting, we usually go get food if it's cold out, or ice cream if it's warm out. And we try to go somewhere different every week. I think it's more exciting to try a new place for food or ice cream than to go to the same place every week. And like we try to get input from the members of where they want to go somewhat. And at the same time, if it's somebody's birthday, we let them choose where to go. So we just try to mix things up to keep things interesting.
Yeah, we with a little bit of a bigger group here, we find it. So we have our own personal sort of goals as it relates to the ministry too. It's like for the first period of time, when we first started the group, it was about casting a wide net, getting as many people there as possible. And then it turned into sort of a retention sort of attitude as we were kind of in the middle years. Xavier, we're going into our 4th year here soon, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, we're about to be done with 3 full years. Yeah.
So, in those, I would say year 1, trying to get a bunch of people. Year 2 is more retention. And then year 3 here was more about an exit strategy because of our personal goals. But through those, we had a particular model that was tailored toward whatever we were going through, whatever phase of the ministry we were going through at the time. And we tried to balance that with essentially, I would even phrase it like this: all 3. We're trying to market as wide as we can. We're trying to retain the people that we have. And then we're trying to build a model so that we can hand it down one day. Those have always been present, but each one was sort of more prominent depending on where we were in the life of the ministry. So we had to sort of not neglect the other 2 while one was more prominent. And with more people, you have to sort of have something that they can expect. So you need a structure, but you can't sacrifice the nimbleness and the freshness you're talking about. I think with a smaller group, you can on a whim say, hey, we're going here today. It's so-and-such's birthday, and they get to choose the place. It's like with a bigger group, you got to let everybody know ahead of time. You got to do like a serious amount of planning in order for things to run smoothly. And we've been successful kind of by the skin of our teeth at times. And I would say very rarely it's fallen apart, but it's like we've experienced enough to know that there's a lot of time and effort that needs to be put into this, a lot of thought. And I think really it's dependent on what kind of ministry you are. You can't really put it into easy classifications here. But I think there's general principles that you can use, certain things that you can touch on. That was just a thought. Xavier, you have anything on that?
Yeah, it's easy and it's not easy, and that's seasonal too. I did have a thought before, which is that there's a reason the church sets up seasons. Like they loosely correlate with when things happen in the Gospels over the course of the year, but like they're kind of all over the place at the same time. It's like, yeah, Christmas is December, but like maybe it was June. I forget how the seasons work, but they're like Jesus was probably born in the summer because of the Middle East and the way temperature. I don't remember exactly. Or like we put Easter at this time and because it's near Pentecost, but it's like there's a natural rhythm to that. That is like, here's our season. It's just kind of ordinary time. And this is just, we go to mass. There's the normal things, there's adoration, there's whatever. And it's regular and it's good. And like, you can count on it. And then there's Advent and it's like, here's the prep for Christmas time. And then there's a Christmas season, and that's when you get all the gifts and the lights and celebration. And then then there's Lent, and then there's Easter, and then it kind of rinse and repeat. And it's like there's a healthiness to that where there's a constancy and then there's a variety. And I think that's just human. And to think we can, it's like we could just mimic the church, and that's a good route because the church seems to have that part down after 2,000 years of experience.
Yeah, and that's something we've tried to do is incorporate the liturgical element, if it's Easter season right now. So last week, well, not this week, but the week before, so right after Easter, we're like, let's do something a little bit bigger than normal. So after a meeting, we went to the Cheesecake Factory, maybe a little slightly fancier than we would usually do, like full sit-down meal kind of thing.
Cool.
Obviously dessert is an option too at the Cheesecake Factory. So something like that, or, so, cause I think it's more fun or more meaningful, when you incorporate the liturgical aspect into your life. So we try to sprinkle that in, whether maybe it's a feast day. So let's all go to mass together for the feast day if it falls on a Tuesday, something like that.
I think just getting back to the institutionalization of the group, it's like there's this entity that is Grapevine or Quo Vadis, and it's essentially being stewarded by the leaders of the group and the audience, probably by and large to this conversation here. Leaders stewarding the entity, the institution, need to be cognizant of what the institution should sort of dabble in terms of the organic, just be deeply attuned to that. And this is kind of it's a sort of I guess it's an apology or an explanation as to why one should sort of foster small groups, for instance. It's like that is a very organic thing that happens just when you get people together. Xavier and I needed to be cognizant of the fact that these people hang out all the time. So we can't fight that. We can't break them up. I think that's a good example of something not to do, is like having the institution break those people up for this perceived, sake of inclusivity and people making new friends. I feel like that's not a good thing to do. It's like you got to ride this wave truly. But if there are cliques, like you were saying, that's a different story. I don't know how to sort of explain that, just kind of a stream of consciousness here, where the institution doesn't dabble in the organic, it sort of contains it. I really like that analogy that you used.
I think it's good to do both, right? Because you guys are doing the small groups, you're also doing the big meetings, or something like I mentioned volleyball before. That by nature is kind of like not as many people going to that. So there's other opportunities that we can foster, that we do foster, for people to be in smaller group settings. And the same thing, like I think by the nature of discussion group, is you just kind of go to which discussion you find, you're interested in talking about that day. And so there's the cross-pollination within those where, okay, well, now you're discussing with people you might not be friends with. And I think that's what makes the discussion model so good. Not to get too off topic here, but is that if somebody's new, they can just jump into a conversation, right? Because it's a set conversation. So they can just jump into that discussion, even if they literally know nobody, and they can either just kind of listen or they can jump in. Whereas if you come to something where maybe it's just a speaker, okay, well now and there's some social time before or after, now you just kind of have to try to find people to talk to. And that can be really challenging if you don't know anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm like thinking about like the role of a ministry leader, and I think there's maybe like it depends on the aims of the group and the specifics of the area, but like there's kind of the general three categories of like social community stuff, direct faith formation, mostly catechetical, but also maybe like sacramental in terms of participating in adoration or something, and then service. And all we can really do is help people come into those scenarios. Like I think the gardening example is actually a good one, because all you can really do is, set up your box, keep your weeds out, make sure you water it or whatever like fertilizer, stuff like that. But you can't pull the leaf along. Like you can't stretch the plant out so it gets a little taller.
Yeah.
Like it's not actually controlling anything. It's just setting up a scenario, a situation. And I think maybe one of the temptations I definitely feel this is like wanting it to go a certain way, or people to like, oh man, if only these people were friends with those people, maybe it wouldn't seem cliquish from the outside, even if they're just friend groups or whatever it might be. Or like, oh, I wish more people came to the adoration rather than the volleyball, or vice versa.
Yeah.
That's just not the cards. That's not the game. That's not how it works. And I have to like remember that maybe it's like there's an institutional drag or weight or something. The longer, maybe it's like that old adage, like power corrupts. And even though it's like such a tiny sliver of power to be a young adult minister leader, that there's this temptation to try to manipulate people's lives a little bit more, as opposed to just in the beginning it was like, hey, I'm just psyched people are here, like let's do a prayer, or like talk about stuff, this is awesome. And then 3 years in it's like, well, what if it was this way, what if the people did this instead of that? And it's like, that's not the right question, you know.
And I think it takes the pressure off too, though, because there's a lot of pressure in being like, this is my exact precise vision, I need to go this way, and these 10 things need to work perfectly in this way all together for us to meet this specific goal we have. It takes the pressure off just to be like, yeah, everybody wants to go to Winking Lizard tonight, even though like I didn't want to. It was like, so what? Like, we're gonna have a good time, and if this is what people want to do, then more power to that. You know, it really does take the pressure off when you can relax and be like, okay, I don't have to make everything go a certain way.
Right. But to be completely laissez-faire, I don't think is the right way to go either. Like, you can have elements of that, and I feel like you should maybe even lean toward that. But to, like, I guess as the minister, you're the gardener, the horticulturalist. Yeah. And you need to make sure that the weeds are taken out. You need to make sure that it is fertilized. You need to make sure that the bounds of the box are structurally sound. And that's
because if you do nothing, then you just show up and sit there in silence, right? Like you have to find the right balance between leading and then also being like in tune to kind of what people are interested in.
Yes. So you sort of determine the guidelines, the principles of this institution, and you provide the way by which the plants grow within it. But there is a very hands-on sort of element where you do need to make sure all these things are in order. And I feel like if those aren't clear, then you're going to overstep your bounds as a leader, or the organicness of the group, for better or for worse, is going to overstep the bounds that you set. And neither one is good. So it's kind of the burden we bear, you know?
Yeah. And this is like a really lighthearted example, but, you know, we ask people, you know, a week ahead, where do you want to go for your birthday after the group? And sometimes people say things that like, it doesn't make sense to go there, right? Like maybe they close too early, or it's too far away, or like it's Lent, like we're not going to get ice cream because like half the people aren't going to eat it, right? So that's like a really, you know, unimportant example, but
no, it
like,
fits.
Right? You have to still kind of try to guide things along.
Exactly.
In another direction, this is just something I've been thinking about lately in my own role as a ministry person, like the spiritual side of being the leader. Like, have you seen it? Like, have you grown? Have you not grown? Are there challenges? Because I know one challenge for me is I get sort of churched out or like burned out a little bit. Like there was a period where I think I was at the church property 4 or 5 times a week for like 6 months. And then like I just felt like it was work. It was work to go be religious and be Catholic. Like it stopped being about knowing Jesus Christ to sort of pull from that side of things. And it just became like timing and scheduling and getting this key and this and that and whatever. What's your kind of experience of that on your own end?
Well, so I would say I can relate to that less from like a leadership standpoint, but more from just being involved. I'm the type of person who wants to be involved with everything. So there was a time when I was going to Grapevine, Catching Fire, Quo Vadis, volleyball, frisbee, like every week, which is a lot of things. And like I enjoyed it. That was fine for like the stage in life I was in at the time. I didn't really have much else going on. But you do kind of like get burnt out after a while. Like, do I really need to go to all three groups like every week? Right. I mean, is that like even beyond the social aspect, is that really benefiting me spiritually, or should I spend more time doing something else that might be a better use of my time? And there's something I try to be cognizant of with our group. We have the tendency to kind of go long in our meetings. So, you guys start like really strictly right on time. We do not. And sometimes like we say, okay, we're starting at 7, we start at 7:15, and then we're there to like 8:30, and then we got to eat in there for 10. I'm like, okay, so Tuesday night, we just took 3 hours of people's time, which is like awesome if people want to do it. But I also don't want it to be something where people are like, I don't want to go to this meeting because it's just so long, or I would love to go out to eat with them, but I don't want to be out all night on a Tuesday. And so sometimes quality is better than quantity, right? Mm-hmm. Just doing more things isn't always beneficial. Sometimes brevity can be good.
Yeah, definitely. And you can only take so much as a person. It's like you can definitely take on more responsibility than you can handle. I know when I continue to be amazed at my personal support structure. As Anthony Mancini, it's like I have so many good friends and so many caring family members, and they will pick up the slack and tell me like it is, like, Anthony, you're taking on too much, you're thinking too much, what have you. And it's just been a blessing. But for somebody who might not have that, you got to be a little bit more cautious about what responsibilities you take on, because you will eventually let somebody down if you take on too much, be it yourself or somebody counting on you. And that, I don't think, is something that needs to happen. Of course, it's not ill-intentioned or anything. It's just, you can absolutely burn yourself out if you allow, your life to be governed by those things that you take on. And yeah, you don't have to do that, right? Is my point. And I've been sort of blessed and lucky to a degree that all these people are willing to pick up the slack if I decide to take on something else. Like this campaign that I ran for city council last year. Like, I didn't have as much time for Grapevine, so obviously Xavier had to pick up some slack, and other people did too, and that was great. But if I were by myself in this, Grapevine, I would have to not do city council because it wouldn't be conducive, So that's a thought. It's like, careful what responsibility you take on. As to
and I think maybe that's a good message from my experience with the Quo Vadis, is that with our group being a little smaller than some of the other ones out there, it doesn't require as much planning. Mm. Like, it really doesn't require like a huge amount of planning. We meet at the same place every week, and then we we pick a topic or something like that, or we pick out a video, which does require some planning. But if you can kind of ask the right questions within the discussion, you can have a great discussion without a ton of preparation. And so it's not a ton of planning, but the benefit, like the fruits, have been amazing. Like the friendships, the memories, the experiences, like the spiritual growth, everything, like, have been awesome. So I guess, if anybody's thinking about starting a young adult group, they might be afraid, oh gosh, like, I have to put in all this planning, all this like logistics, and like, what if nobody shows up? Whereas I feel like my experience has been, I put in like a okay, like a little bit of effort, right? Like not over the top. And God has just provided so much in terms of the fruit from the group.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point to remember and highlight, that the God providing part, because that's definitely something I forget. I forget that all the time when it comes to like the internal thoughts I have. Like I'll overthink the young adult stuff and this and that, and take on the false idea that it's kind of on me or on, me and Anthony and our other couple helpers with leading the group, that we have to make it work. And that gets really overwhelming. And it even like taints my view. Like I've had it happen where I'll go to a meeting and like I'm in my own head and I'm like, right after the end, I'm like, oh, that was terrible. Like blah, this did not go good this week. And then I pause and like catch myself and look around and like people are smiling, they're talking, they participated in the prayer. Like, oh, it's like, oh, I saw that person at adoration. I didn't see them before. And it's like, I think that I have to be, it's like as a gardener, to bring that analogy back, it's like if I'm not the one like poking the plant every single day and double checking for weeds, and then like a flower isn't there or a flower is there, but it wasn't one, like if I didn't coax the flower out with, I don't know, talking or something, that something's wrong, but really nothing's wrong. It's just all me in my head. And I'm forgetting that I'm just a facilitator and that ultimately God is the one doing the heavy lifting of like inspiring people's hearts and bringing them in or keeping them around or doing work on them that I can't even see in their own lives. And just to remember that, it's really important, particularly for me, because I forget that too much. And then I feel like garbage. And then I remember it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's not all on me. And I shouldn't think it is for myself. And I shouldn't think it is for like outward pride either.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great point, what you said about how we don't always see the outcome. But the fact that we're helping people along, or like we're journeying with people and they're journeying with us in our lives of faith, it can almost seem too ordinary, but we shouldn't forget like that makes a difference. The fact that I go to adoration more because you guys set up adoration, like it might not seem like it might not seem like this insanely huge thing, but like that matters. And when you get, however many people you guys have, however many people we have, the other groups, you get all these people who, like, it's not always about like the huge miracles that happen. It's also a lot about like that week to week, day to day, consistent faith life. And it's maybe not as glamorous, but I think that's something that we really do contribute to with these groups, is like just helping people have a consistent, like good, healthy faith life and good, healthy friends to have that faith life with. So it's like I said, it's not necessarily super glamorous or like out of this world, or you can maybe write out a newspaper headline about it, but like it matters. And there's a lot of things that we probably don't see that are happening in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to, whenever things are sort of, they seem unknown or, a little precarious, like we're in a transitional phase or something, I like to think of the worst case scenario. And you kind of weigh that against best case scenario, and then you can bank on something in between happening, typically. But the worst case scenario is like, hey, we can no longer continue leading this group, and for reasons outside of our control, or simply we don't want to anymore. I think that happens often, and that's absolutely the worst case scenario, because an exit strategy I think is warranted and this sort of thing, so that a good thing can keep going. But worst case, we've touched a lot of people, or through us the Lord has touched a lot of people, and they're better off for that. Even if it's one interaction, even if they've come to a meeting once, they at least know that sort of thing exists. And I'll draw from my personal experience. The first time I went to Catching Fire was not at the time a profound experience, but obviously it led me down this path that I am now. And it led to my reversion the community that I was welcomed into, just like this, the effect that the culture of Catholicism has on a group of people, a group of young people, was on full display. And I was like, I want to be a part of this. Just, I don't know why I'm being pulled toward it, but I want to not only be a part of it, I want to help direct it. So I got to imagine something like that, maybe not, hopefully that intense is happening to people who are somewhat involved, or, come to an adoration every week or something like that. It's like we can take solace in that. Worst case scenario is that there's a footprint left, a good one, and a legacy that, will never go away. So
yeah, I think when you look back at ththings, when you take the time to reflect on things, there's a lot of stuff that you just forget about or you don't appreciate. Mm-hmm. And I relate it to like when you're in school and you take a class, day to day, it doesn't really feel like you learn that much. But then when you look back at the end of the semester over, here's all the things I learned, you think, wow, I actually did learn a ton. And I think it's the same thing with a lot of things in life, and definitely these groups, is that you feel like, okay, we just lead a group every week. But then when you think about, wait, like these are all the experiences I've had, these are all the memories I've made, all the friends I've made, all like the holy moments, all the things I've gotten to do, all the learning I've done in my faith and things like that, you realize, wait, this has actually been very meaningful, and there's been a lot of growth and great outcomes from it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this tension, I guess, of wanting to leave something behind, and that there's a danger in thinking that way. Like, for example, when you make a birthday cake, no one's disappointed that it's gone when it's eaten. That's kind of what it is. And I'm not saying that, a young adult group should be structured as just one-offs for a couple of years and that be the goal. But in the bigger picture, it's really not up to a particular young adult ministry leader to make it last forever. It's totally outside of our control, especially when it's like us three, where it's on the side in addition to a full-time job thing. Like if you're a paid position, it's a little different circumstance, but it still probably applies, which is I feel this draw to think of it purely as like it should be like a bridge or a monument where, we built it, but then, and the people helped us build it who were there, and then it just functions forever. Like people are crossing the Brooklyn Bridge to this day, and it's still there. And like, yeah, there's a little bit of maintenance, but wow, look at that. And like wanting to leave that behind versus, and getting disappointed if that doesn't happen. Whereas it's like, it's not really up to us whether it's a bridge or a birthday cake. That's sort of, if God wants it to keep going and we put in reasonable effort to try to participate in that, his will in that direction, like somebody will show up. Somebody will be brought forth to continue. And maybe God just wants it to be a birthday cake. Like maybe it's a 3 or 4 year season for a particular group of people, and then it transitions to something else. And I think one thing I'm remembering today specifically is, the whole world isn't one parish. And even in places like, maybe it's a little different if it's like a little country church and you're somewhere like that, and it's a whole different ballgame. I'm not trying to talk to that, but especially in like populous areas, like we all three of us are good examples. Like our parishes didn't have anything, so we went to Catching Fire, and that was somewhere else, and we were willing to drive. It's like, not every parish needs to have everything all the time. They're the home of the sacraments, and they should be a center of community. But it's like, if it's not the end of the world if you have to go to the next town over to meet some young people who are also Catholic. And like, that's something to remember for me too, is like, even bigger picture, it's not on our shoulders as a particular young adult group to be the saviors of young adult Catholicism in our town. Mm-hmm. Like when I say it out loud, it sounds kind of silly, but I get caught thinking that way or feeling that, like, oh no, what if if we can't find somebody to hand this off to, that's it, it's over forever, as opposed to like, well, they could drive to Avon Lake if they want to, or they could drive to Parma, and maybe somebody will show up. Say it again.
Or there could be a completely new group. You never know.
And I think, like you were saying, there's so many of those small moments, like the class, or like with the birthday cake, it kind of takes away from those to say, oh, it's nothing now. It's like, oh, the birthday cake's gone. What a disaster. That was, this is awful, as opposed to, wow, it was a delicious cake and everybody celebrated and ate it. Or I really learned from that class, or look at these friendships I have. or the spiritual growth. Like, I think it takes away from that to overly emphasize something lasting forever.
Yeah. And I think there probably will be lasting outcomes, but they might not be the ones we expected, or they might not be super visible, or they might not be institutional, right? So for the group to last, in a sense, I mean, it doesn't mean that it has to be here in 2030, but if there's a couple that met at the group and they just, now it's 2090 and they just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary or whatever, and they have all these grandkids and like that, I mean, that's a lasting outcome, right? Or if you have lifelong friends, that's a lasting outcome. Or if you stay in the church the rest of your life because you had a good faith community when you're a young adult, that's a lasting outcome. So there are lasting outcomes, just to name a few potential ones. Even long past the physical, visible group exists.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely something important to remember. Like, sometimes I try to think of it like maybe like high school or college, where it's a period in people's lives. And in a certain way, it's true. Like the college I went to was called St. Ed's. I'll just call it that. Or I'm sorry, high school. So it's like I went to high school and I was at this St. Edward High School. And, that school still exists. The building's still there. A lot of the same teachers are still there. Maybe some of the administrators. But 99% of the people are different because 99% of them are students who move through. So it's like St. Ed's from 2012 to 2016 does not exist anymore as an institution. Like, it's the same building. It's some of the same it's the same garden box, but all the plants are different. And to lament the fact that the plants are different, or to lament the fact that my class is no longer in high school, is kind of silly. And like, there's nothing wrong with the high school if that happens. And it doesn't take away from me having gone there. Like, if the school were to shut down, I still went there.
Right.
And that's
I think that,
good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the connections we make in the young adult community too will have a lot of good outcomes in the future. Like, I'll try to give a couple examples. One would be the Padre Pio Academy School in Lakewood. Like, it's a great Catholic school, or the Lyceum on the east side. These are like great classical, very faithful Catholic schools, and they're small though. And I know just from like our groups, so many more people now know about these schools, and a lot of us don't have kids yet, but we will one day. It's okay. Well, now we know about these schools. Or it could be maybe somebody wants to start a ministry 20 years from now, and they're like, okay, well, who can be in this ministry or who can help with it? And now they know all these other faithful Catholics in their peer group who they can reach out to. Like, I just feel like the connections and the sharing of knowledge and opportunities that we're going to have in the future is important, and it's going to be big. Like, we joke sometimes when we're all 80, we're going to have we're going to go on a cruise, a catching fire cruise, like reunion. But like, it's funny, but the truth is that like most of us are going to be in the Cleveland area for a really long time, probably the rest of our lives. And to really be connected with other faithful Catholics who are going through like the same life stages at the same time you are, I think is really important, even if, these groups don't last forever. But those effects will still be there.
Yeah, it's almost the institution as it manifests in the physical world is very much fleeting. But I want to call it like a mystical legacy or mystical footprint. And if I were to try to draw an analogy to that, it would be like the roots underneath the garden bed. So like you don't see them. But
maybe like the flowers, seeds that flow in the wind.
That too, yeah. Those are there to stay, and those pollinate, other parts outside of the box. And as far as, how that relates to the plants in the box, it's almost like the next generation is sort of seeded, and the same species of plant now can grow in a different place. So I think to build on your example, Charlie, which is very real. I didn't know Padre Pio Academy, like what it was exactly. I knew it existed, and I didn't know the Lyceum existed until, a couple of years ago, I want to say. But yeah, it's like those institutions will actually be pollinated by this network that we've all had a hand in building. And then the product of those institutions will go on to like create more institutions to kind of further on the process. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And that's something that you can't really measure, and that's something that you can't really even see, which is kind of what we're going for here ultimately. And we're not necessarily in control of that, which is heartening. You know, it's like takes the weight off your shoulders.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, we're getting on in time a little bit. So any kind of final thoughts from the table? Any random off the wall things, or just extra points you want to make before we wrap up?
We've talked about so much, so not one thing in particular comes to mind. But I think that in summary, starting the group and helping to lead the group has been such a blessing. And if there's anybody out there who's thinking about starting a young adult group, you can do it, and it's worth it. God will provide.
Well, Charlie, I want to also add that I think your model is fantastic for most parishes. And I think that because it's good. It's almost like there's a simplicity in the way you run it that you've sort of created that I think is easily replicable. And then the demographic, sort of the number of people, is probably going to be the most relatable too. And what I mean by that is most parishes, I would say, aren't sprawling with young adults. So to have a group where it kind of brings together the relatively fewer young adults is sort of more in line with your sort of model. And it's something that I think is achievable for most people. So people should talk to you.
Yeah. We didn't even get into anything about how do you actually get people to come to your group, which is probably maybe the most intimidating part of it when you're first starting out. Like, okay, yeah, I can show up every Tuesday, but how am I going to get anybody else to? But that's a conversation for another time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can briefly touch on it. We got what'd you say, guerrilla social media and in-person invitation. Social media guerrilla campaign. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. In-person works the best. I know it can be the scariest sometimes, but most people, like, if somebody came up to you at church, would you be like, ew, I hate this person? No, you'd be like, oh, like, I'm at church and somebody wants to tell me something or ask me about something. Like, I'm sure they're a pleasant person, right? You already have one thing in common is you go to the same church, or you at least were at the same mass together.
Right. Definitely. Awesome, man.
Well, hey, Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on. I really appreciate it. It was a good conversation. I think we got into some stuff that's very valuable and not necessarily the surface level things too that you might think would come up. Like, there's a lot of logistics, there's a lot of planning, but there's also a deeper side. There's the spiritual, emotional journey of leading a group too. So just really appreciate it. And thank you for anyone who listened to the end. You guys are the best. That's all, folks. We hope you were inspired by this podcast and encourage you to share it with anyone you think would appreciate it, whether via social media, a text, or even an old-fashioned word-of-mouth recommendation. We also warmly invite you to distribute our Catholic scapulars, medals, books, and booklets to your family, friends, parish, and social groups. Visit us online at Catholicity.com for more information. The real work of the Mary Foundation is accomplished by people just like you. There are 3 ways to help. First, please pray for everyone who hears, reads, or receives our materials. Second, share them with everyone you know, family, friends, fellow parishioners, and the people you work with. Only you can reach them. Finally, please help us financially. It seems impossible, but we don't do traditional fundraising here at the Mary Foundation. We rely on your generosity and God's providence. By the way, if you, your parish, or your Catholic group would like to distribute our materials by the dozens, hundreds, or even thousands, all we ask for is help covering our materials costs, so please visit us online for suggested donations. For our Canadian friends and those outside of the United States, Only online requests are accepted, so please refer to the special shipping rates listed on our website. Thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to working with you. May God bless you always. And now, here's a short preview of our Rosary and Divine Mercy Chaplet, likely the most popular rosary recording in the history of the world.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
For an increase in the virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
All rights are reserved and duplication without permission is prohibited.